Welcome back to Fast Market here on the Schwab Network. It's time for our cash tag segment. For that, we're going to bring in Andy Swan. He's a co-founder at LikeFolio. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're talking fintech, we're talking swipes, we're talking the consumer here. Visa's had some modest moves lately. It's not a highly volatile stock, but it's had a pretty good run so far this year, up about as much as the S&P 500. What kind of data do you guys have out of LikeFolio? Is the consumer still strong?
Yeah, I'd say, overall, I think the consumer's hanging in there, I think is the best way to put it. I wouldn't classify the consumer as strong. I think there's also, a little bit of a bifurcation in terms of the consumer. I think that the upper end earners and wealth holders, their spending certainly holding up very well, if not expanding. It's the lower end, lower income earners that we're really worried about here. But, Visa overall is really just a barometer, I think, for the overall economy in many ways. They cover so many transactions. They're in so many wallets that, when we think about Visa earnings, we think about, tipping the hand of the economy overall. And so we look at Visa right now. We do see an increase in overall mentions of Visa, which is good. I think that normally that's people talking about, using their Visa card, paying off their Visa card, that sort of thing. And that looks pretty good from a consumer spending perspective. We think it'll come really right in line with expectations in terms of Visa's transaction volume and revenues. The one or two things that really concern us about Visa is when you start breaking it out and comparing Visa versus the other competitors like American Express and MasterCard, Discover, all of those. And so with American Express, we're really seeing a nice increase in the web visits, which tells us that people are probably going there to open their new cards more than they are to Visa or many of its partners. And so we think American Express of the group is doing the best. And we expect that to continue because, once again, that American Express tends to service a little bit higher end consumer, and we think that's the area where the economy is doing the best. But overall, in terms of going into this earnings report, we think Visa comes right in line. Really don't see a huge opportunity here in terms of upward or downward movement. We think it'll probably come in line and be well within the expected move.
Andy, what I love about Visa, not necessarily the stock and its price, but the company, is the fact that they're boring. They're boring and massive, and they take a small slice out of everything, right? Yep. And they move along. And their gross margins, do you know their gross margins are almost 100%? Their gross margins. Their other margins are, with the 50% being high, they're 67%
on operating margins.
Margins. It's crazy the numbers they put up, but it's not without risk. Right. They're not growing a lot, Andy. And I'd like to know, because your data kind of jumps off the page at you here, why do you think American Express, that is comparable to Visa, but really not comparable to Visa because they hold balances, Visa just merely swipes? Why do you think American Express, by the way, they hit their stock after their earnings too? Is that a cautionary tale when your numbers for AXP are so dominant?
Yeah, well, the reason that the stock was hit on AXP was because they had to, or they increased the reserves that they had for people who weren't going to pay their bills in the future. So that's a risk that American Express has that Visa does not. Visa just takes the money every single transaction, puts it into their own bank account, and says, all right, you partner banks worry about whether or not the person is going to be able to pay this off. And so I think that makes Visa very unique. I think it makes it somewhat attractive in this type of interest rate environment because they're not taking on that consumer debt risk. And we do see a lot of debt increases on the consumer side of things, and those debt levels getting really, really stretched. So the idea of defaults is very much in play, and that's something Visa doesn't really have to worry about, although I don't think that they want their partner companies having a lot of trouble either. So you're right. I think American Express is hitting with the right customers in terms of driving that growth. that one-time adjustment, I think, to their reserves is in the rearview mirror, and I think that would be the stock that I would look at before I look at Visa. But I think both are decent choices here.
Global fintech market, Andy, I read some data today that is worth estimated about $165 billion today, forecast to grow to $400 billion by 2027. Does this open up opportunities, even with your data that you have? We just saw retail sales last week. The consumer is still relatively strong. We'll get a read on GDP on Thursday morning, first read on Q3 GDP. Can the consumer provide the lift for this company? Because even though credit card debt's rising, it doesn't seem like it's really slowing down the consumer at this point.
No, not yet. And everybody's just kind of waiting for that next shoe to drop. I feel like everybody's waiting for that. In the meantime, these companies keep posting pretty good numbers, and I think that's probably what will happen tomorrow. I think Visa will post pretty good numbers, but they'll have to show some caution and concern about the future, because that's what everybody has to do at this point in time. And so, the consumer, especially the North American and U.S. consumer, continues to show resilience. It's a group of people that historically has not been good to bet against. And so I think that's the case here.
All right, great stuff. As always, Andy, appreciate it. Thanks for the data.
Thank you. Have a good one. All
right, that's Andy Swan, co-founder at LikeFolio, breaking down the Visa data. It seems like it's, to Andy's point, it's firm, but it's not like explosive. But if you look at a day-to-day move on like a name like Visa, it's not like it's one of the more volatile names.
No,